So as I mentioned, I am from Scotland a long time ago. I've been in the States now for 30 years. I can't believe it's been that long. Where did 3 decades go? But I grew up in Edinburgh, which is the capital of Scotland. Big city, but it's a very often grey country, and so rainy country. And so what people do is paint every possible part of their houses in bright, gaudy, obnoxious colors. And that has definitely seeped into it's part of my genetic makeup as an artist, I feel like. I also grew up in the 70s and 80s. So I was in the Boy George Bananarama, soft cell, neon yellow, pink phase in my teenage, most influential years, and I still listen to that stuff in the car. So neon palette was very influential too, and it's still something that I start with neon pink and neon yellow, as you can see out there. Every time I have to trick myself out of it a lot of the time because it's so ingrained and subconsciously built into me. I also, growing up in Scotland, it was this mishmash of scale differentiation and the idea of a romantic Scotland with heather-covered hillsides and sheep everywhere was one side of things, but the train-spotting, dark, drug-infested city. Not that I was very middle class growing up, so I didn't experience the depths of that in any way, shape, or form, but I love that there are these extremes of experience of what it is to think about what it might be like to live in Scotland and what it actually is. So those also become part of my heritage and part of the kind of aesthetic taste sphere that I currently push against, I guess. Last two things are in terms of deep-seated subconscious understanding of why I make the things I make is that I grew up sailing every summer in Scotland on the west coast. My mom and dad had a boat. And I just realized 2 years ago, I'm like, oh duh, that's why I make inflatables, big giant building here. I'm like, why did I not think of that before? But, and then Scottish humor is such another sort of deeply seated, important piece of my puzzle. It's something that Scots make fun of themselves, don't take themselves too big. We're not allowed to take ourselves too seriously, so we have to make fun of ourselves all the time. And so I've tried to embody or embed that in my work through this idea of physical comedy and also comic, figurative, figural, cartoonish relationships to form and object and living, breathing organisms in some way, shape, or form. So I'm not going to play the clip of Billy Connolly right now, but he's doing this floppy physical comedy skit. So, but for time, we're going to keep moving. I also grew up watching Star Trek, one of the many American imports into Scotland. And so my sci-fi geekness is still present in the way that I think about these creatures that I make, or this idea of organisms, or a kind of futurism that I'm trying to think about where our evolutionary future might be, 50% plastic in our bodies, maybe even more, right? So this sort of idea of cyborgs or aliens becoming part of our organisms on Earth, or where we end up, is something I'm still curious about, but in a really kitsch manner, right? So I'm playing with this idea of plastic, both in terms of taste and aesthetic, as well as physical materials. When I moved to Chicago in 1993, I was like a world of color, kitsch color, I guess, neon palettes, a different kind of color palette opened up to me. And so a different set of permissions of how to be an artist which blew my mind, right? Which in Scotland, at the time when I left in 1993, it was still a very traditional art market setup. Or the ways that you got to be an artist were not the thing that I was interested in. So when I got to Chicago, I was really happy that there was lots of diversity, lots of difference, lots of ways that people were being critical of the traditions of making, and I've tried to build that into my teaching life and practice in terms of encouraging students to think about how their unique experience of the world, their personality infects and interrupts and makes a particularly unique equation for this art practice that you build, rather than it having to be one particular way. These are my 3 kids on the right. We were in Greece a couple summers ago. So the last piece of the puzzle in terms of my experience of being a parent and a mother is that these things that I make became this sort of collection of self-portraits or portraits of these living, breathing organisms that I was responsible for, and I have to say, terrified about being responsible for it the first few years I did it. And so having them really changed the urgency of my work, really changed the direction that I was, my focus. Because before that, I had been really thinking of my work as more pure abstraction, but I love that they, watching SpongeBob cartoons with them they infected me in a really good way on so many levels and allowed a more figural, comic, playful aspect into my work. I don't know, blabbling too much. Influences range greatly from SpongeBob on the right to, or Patrick I should say, to E.T., to bioluminescent jellyfish, seaweed, real-time Mars rover footage, tardigrades, this tiny creature that can survive in space, all sorts of things. I'm pretty eclectic in the kind of ways that I'm pulling from the natural world and the imaginative world. Did you have a question?
That looks like a scene from Lost in Space.
Yeah, it's a Star Trek episode, yes, with the plastic rocks. I'm a lover of plastic rocks that you can throw. And then asteroid Ida. And then color, I do want to say, like, I am somebody who really obviously thinks about color intensely in my work, but I really think about color as being linked to a genetic code that the animal kingdom has for survival. Right? It's really linked. We know we have to pause and pay attention to color because it's either about pleasure or danger, right? Death or birth in some sense. So I really use that aggressive pay attention to me color palette as a way to have people pause and stop and look more deeply, maybe. Whether that's something that they associate with an aesthetic joy, or whether they understand it as more it's a really poisonous object, is equally great in my mind, right? Can be both. Also love camouflage on animals. I love tattoos on the skin. I really think of the way that I paint these objects as making a tattooed graffiti surface on these bodies that I make. And so I'm sort of drawing from all the ways that human beings are trying to, and the animal kingdom too, but we are trying to mark our territory or mark our presence or our place or our existence in a moment in space and time, and in the way that I'm thinking about the identities that we work on. Form. When I moved to Chicago, I walked through the Art Institute of Chicago and saw this amazing African Bowley sculpture, which is the top left, that is made of dirt and blood and all sorts of bodily fluids you might not want to know about, and straw. And I loved that it was this holder, this anthropomorphic figural form that was a holder of power and energy without it being explicitly one animal or another animal or a body in some sense. So that I'm constantly trying to ride the line between something that's quite literally body and something that's more abstract or figural in the ways that I'm making the forms that I make. Greek Roman sculptures of dogs, my own pets, and then the big, giant, obnoxious, furry sheep that is my cultural heritage, right? The loud, obnoxious bagpipes that get filled with air and make a very squeaky sound. So mine is a very, obnoxious, I guess, aggressive culture in some ways. So we don't make beautiful things or beautiful sounds a lot of the time. So here's a sketchbook page just to get us started, so you get to sort of see where the content and the form starts to build in my head. I broke my foot 5 years ago falling off a ladder in my studio. Don't ever put ladders on your fabric that you're painting. That was a very dumb idea. And so when I was healing this very lumpy, bumpy foot that was at the end of my leg, it was something that I was looking at a lot. And also where the screws that went in, I was thinking about, okay, where are those holes, and do they become a portal in terms of if I started putting clear plastic in some of the forms so that there were windows inside of the form, which I liked too in terms of a female bodily reference point, right? Or vulnerable, hence it, bodily reference point. Okay, so 2 pieces, similar titling, content, 10 years apart. One is much bigger than the other, but I'm going to talk to you today about sort of 3 wings of my practice. So the idea of the inflatable form, the painted inflatable form as being singular objects that kind of hold personality and character embedded in them is one wing. And then the idea of site specificity, objects in relationship to an architecture or a space. And then inflatables in relationship to a moving, kinetic, performative action. So we've got clown and knees up on the right, where I was thinking about both a historical reference to abstract expressionist artists who had come before, Jasper Johns being the target image, and then also graffiti kind of marks and moves on the surface. Things that are more site-specific and feel like they are infecting or seeping out of a building. So the title is Limes and Bricks, Suck a Pink, You Tasteless Hunk, and I was really thinking about ways that I could get humor or explicit content into the work, both through the object itself, but also through the titling. So I was thinking about a James Joycean kind of smashing of language together to make something that wasn't really anything, but was everything all at the same time, if that makes sense. So this object was inflated in a very beautiful arts and crafts bungalow in Oak Park, the town I lived in for 25 years. Very liberal town, and I really loved that I did this super obnoxious, irreverent, distasteful in some sense, shoving of this thing in this beautiful building, because I really liked testing this idea of taste and class and aesthetic choices in the way that I was trying to make the sculptures. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Tickly throat. I'm not sick, promise. 2 other pieces that I made. One on the left, Limp Punk Love Junk, another smashing of language together. But the conversation that I had with people at the opening was like, they felt like this object, or this creature, beast, was trapped. And I really liked that there was, by squishing it into a space, I created empathetic responses with the object. And obviously I deflated and inflated the object when I was painting it, so there are multiple layers, and it picks up the folds in the love handles on the body, which I have many of. in really nice ways and in really layered ways. And then the one on the right was a collaboration with Bahar Yorukoglu, Turkish artist who lives in Boston, and she makes these incredible light-filled projections with pieces of plexiglass. And so I made a bunch of pockets in the inflatables, and then she, or the singular inflatable, and she inserted the plexiglass pieces in there and then projected the films that she makes on top of them. So I really like that there was this moving image over the surface of that work.
It's like from the lid?
No, it's projections on the surface, but I do also do light from the lid. Anyway, I'm just trying to throw a bunch of things in terms of like the idea of an artist being known for doing a certain thing, but always has, I mean, for me, I get bored really fast, so I'm always trying to build the next question into the work I make, and I'm trying not to be static too much. I'm also trying to maintain a curiosity. Since I teach freshmen to grad students, I have to keep my toolkit up to date, and so it's really nice that I get to kind of play with that in my own practice as well.
Do you work from sketches to begin with?
I do create lots of silhouette shapes when I'm thinking about the form, so I think about the front, the side, the top, the bottom, back, left, so that when I cut the patterns, I kind of know what I'm doing, although I kind of don't as well. I often will add appendages, or I will tuck and fold things so that they sort of sit with a little bit more of a bulge. So even if I have a sense of what each side looks like, I'm still not ever quite sure until I plug the thing in and it inflates exactly what I've got. And then usually the first time I inflate it, it pops at certain seams because I'm not a seamstress and I haven't quite done it right. But then I just patch over the top and stitch around it with a curved needle so that I build this sort of band-aiding or living, breathing, I'm getting old kind of body into the work itself. Rather than being worried that it stays pristine, I actually like that I have to wash it and band-aid it and repaint it and get it ready to go out for another event. I like that it's doing a lot of work out in the world rather than being in a protected museum space all the time. Anyway, I should say, I drove all this work in my minivan from Chicago to Philly. I showed up at the gallery and the curator was a little worried that I wouldn't have enough work because it was just, but then we took it all out the car and plugged it all in and it went whoop! Not quite that quickly, but the piece in the center in the back is called My Little Pony because my girls at that point were obsessed. But I like that it becomes like a Trojan horse version of My Little Pony. It's this giant object that seems sweet, but could be a risk factor, just because of the monumentality of scale and presence in the physical space. Okay, so that was more site specificity, so now we're on to more performative objects. So as I mentioned before, Scottish has to make fun of myself all the time, but I do take the painting and the art making really seriously, but I also can't say that out loud in some sense. But I also love Rebecca Horn's work and have always, I love Bennett Cave's work, and so this sort of idea of an art object being democratic enough that I can utilize it as a garment, right, as a performative prop, a bodily extension. It's something that I've always talked a good big game about, and so I finally was like, you know, Claire, you have to try this out for yourself. So the first one I made a shape very similar to this, and I danced in my studio by myself and filmed myself, because, yeah, nobody wants to see that. But it allowed me to open up a new kineticism and ways that humor was built into the object. So this is called Double Disco, and it was done at a defibrillator. I'm hoping it's not crazy loud. Here we go. 20-second clip, but it started super low and super slow and ended up super high and super fast. And I really liked that the performers it took a while for people to recognize that it was a Bee Gees song. And then the performers were really struggling at the end to keep up with the choreography because they could not see outside of the form. Like they were blind basically. And they had to call for one another to find one another to do the sumo belly rub. But I like that the double disco up thing was about two-ness, which historically, painting-wise, links to diptych, right? So I like that I was coding the work to a painting reference, but I also like that I was coding the work to this idea of finding love or a partnership or being in this thing together somehow. And yet the problem was that they could not see one another. They had to call one another to find one another. So there was a problem. I was trying to put problems in their way too. So it was an imperfect union in some ways. But I like that I get, in the work, I sometimes get to work with these prior to social culturation. For human beings, there is this sort of genetic coding, again, of procreation, right, or survival instinct. And so I like that I kind of am moving all the way back in some sense, that you don't really need to know anything about art in some ways to recognize or empathize with the objects that I'm making. I then did a performance piece at the Acre Residency in Wisconsin with 12 resident artists who are not trained dancers, but were willing to learn a very dumb country line dance for a couple hours and then perform it. So this piece I called Ruddy Udder Dance because I was sort of thinking of it as a giant prehistoric cow-like beast lumbering through the Midwestern landscape. But it's also a mix of a caterpillar with multiple legs. So here's a little clip of this. It was really hard to find a country song that wasn't about love, cars, religion, but I finally did find a very dumb one. So here we go. Whoa, sorry, cut off. Again, just a little clip, but it was really important for me to think about. I like that song, A, because it had some simple choreography that I could teach people very fast, and B, that it moved from, it was sort of about working super hard and then letting go, playing super hard at the end of the week, which I really like in relationship to being an artist because you're constantly, you have 5 different things that you're thinking about every hour of the day. You've got 3 jobs, you've got kids, you've got a partner to deal with. So the sort of, the complexities of life get built into the way that that song still is about playing as well. So, but the scale thing becomes really important in relationship to this idea of being a female artist making monumental sculpture and trying to push against the 1960s metal, steel big dudes, right? And so I really wanted the scale to be very much about me taking up as much space as I possibly could in really obnoxious ways.
How many fans in these sort of system?
This one was only, it's 2 lobes of one figure,
Yeah.
so each lobe has one big Stanley fan, those big yellow ones.
Oh,
So, but it only needs 1 for each. But it's 40 feet tall by about 30 feet wide by about 25 feet deep together. And I like that this was again, this is my sci-fi geekdom, but this idea of an alien mother creature landing in this atrium space in Jacksonville, Florida, at the Jacksonville MOCA, but reaching out a hand to say hello. So like there's a way that she, I think of her as her, she has a more welcoming range perhaps, but you can also, there are clear windows in the piece. I'm not sure if we've got a second image. That you can see right into the windows if you walk up the stairs into each landing. And so I painted, this one was the first time I painted both the inside and the outside of the surface. I put windows into the work. I'd done a collaborative project with a colleague, and he wanted windows for the performers to be inside the work. So then I was like, oh, I could steal that and work it into my own sculpture. So I like that you could see into the belly of her beast, as it were. Yeah, so I'm not going to say too much more, but I like that she becomes this, the Adam's Madam reference in the title. I'm sort of thinking of her as being this madam who has absolute control of the room in some sense. So I like that she is this powerful figure. Then this is a second version of her. I had to do a bunch of repairs. I replaced some of the clear windows with some bright fabric. I was on top of a roof in Chicago in the summer, and it was just a one-day thing. But the Kimball Art Center on North Avenue, actually just north of North Avenue, but it's a pretty new little art center. Anyway, the reason I show you this one is this idea that the work that I make often evolves over time, and I'm trying to think about each, rather than being super protective of the work and trying for it not to get broken or hurt or messed up out in the world. I like that each version of it has it's an evolutionary pathway, right? Yeah.
Do you do rigging points, or do you do like a net over the piece?
I did loops and hooks that I sewed into the skin of it, and then just had guy ropes coming down and sandbags on the inside of the work as well as on the outside of the guy ropes. So there's multiple points of containment, but a net would be a smart plan. I got to steal that. Yeah. So this is a piece installed in Vermont, where you could look inside of the work as well as outside. And so the fact that I had painted the inside became a really nice additional experience for people. And I love the work of a French group, Plastic Fantastique, and they do a lot of, you can walk into an entire building and experience it from inside. So I'm thinking more about that. I haven't managed to repeat it yet. This was just from a couple of years ago, but it's percolating in my head.
So you just like filled up the existing holiday or whatever it's called?
Yeah, so the architecture of the building really held the piece in different ways, and then the window that I had on one end of it allowed you to see into it, even though you couldn't actually walk. I was inside of it when I took that picture, but the members of the public weren't necessarily able to get in it, but that's the next step.
Do you sew them or do you glue them?
I sew them just a straight stitch with my commercial grade sewing machine. I don't have an industrial sewing machine because I sew on the concrete floor of my studio because I work with very, very big pieces of fabric. So it has to be a machine I can move as I work my way around the work. Yeah, but it's a very basic straight stitch. I'm not sealing the seams. The fan is constantly on for it to be inflated, and if it's turned off, then it will die and deflate, which I like having to work on timers a lot of the time. All right, so we're now into like things that I am continuing to test and play with and think about and experiment with. So I'm going to show you, how are we doing for time? Are we okay? I'm going to show you a bunch of different things kind of quickly, hopefully. So internal lighting, black light. I worked in El Dorado, Arkansas. I get in trouble for that. A theater space, black box space, and I was able to really have the work feel like it was an immersive alternate universe environment, just because we were able to darken down the architecture. So I really like that. That becomes a different, like it's a laser tag meets Star Trek meets being on Mars or something. We also did a performance at the opening reception, and my audio collaborator, Josh Patterson, was there on the rugs, just working with his MIDI board and an iPad and his laptop and a mic where he does throw singing. So he was creating these amazing kind of really rumbly, atmospheric noises, which I will share with you here. We were also, performers were inside the work, rolling around, and then we have to always have a handler because they can't actually see where they're going. So the handlers were also from the local university dance theater group, and were wearing kind of, I was trying to think about how do I have them all feel like they are not necessarily recognizably human, or not necessarily recognizably individuals. So they were these unicorns. Anyway, gotta keep going for time. Next thing is texture, right? So I've also been playing with very non-archival but expandable great stuff foam, which I love. But it makes a really incredible surface that I can then draw a Sharpie marker on. I can spray paint over the top of. But it makes it harder to pack it small and move it in a suitcase. So the pieces that I make with that texture have to get shipped in much larger boxes, which I would like to try and maintain a nimbleness as an artist to be able to move across the globe with the work in suitcases, right? I took a show to Paris that way. So this is a great texture, and I really like it, but it limits me in certain ways, right? Everything I do it's perfect for one thing, but it doesn't work exactly for the 360-degrees I want. So I'm always kind of navigating that. Also the idea of humor being embedded in this, this poor student. She was very, very good sport in terms of wearing this object. This is the first time I had made an object that I felt it was more a garment because the legs were out, the arms were out, the head was out. Well, you can't see here. And the idea of comically trying to ride a tricycle. More texture, giant scale. I show this because I was so impressed with the Louis Kahn Library at Phillips Exeter Academy that they actually let me put this crazy mother in their beautiful national architectural historical building. They let me do this crazy shit. And so it was up for 3 months, and I was just so happy it worked out. But that was the theater department that came in and helped me with the rigging for that, because my notion of what it would take was not enough. But they came in and did it in a second, and I was like so grateful that they helped me out there. And so it also has lights on the inside, black lights on the inside, so the piece has a daytime kind of light from above, but then a glow underneath it. Also, I titled it Face of Bo, because I'm a Doctor Who fan as well. So that's one of the characters from Doctor Who, which is the oldest living organism in the universe, and it's just a giant head in a tube, basically. Next thing, fish bowls, or ecosystems, what's it called, terrariums. So I had an actual professional inflatable company build me a clear sphere so that I could protect my much more delicate objects from the elements out in the world, rain, etc., wind. So I was really happy that this works super nicely to protect my delicate flowers out in the world. And I like that it becomes this other way that you get to create another atmosphere within a fading atmosphere of the world somehow. Color palette, I mentioned earlier, I have to trick myself to do a different kind of color palette. So these works were done with much more aeration. So the spray, I use spray paint and I mask up goggles and everything. I'm evil, I know it's evil stuff, and I'm trying to change my wicked ways, but it's hard. And so I do the neon pink, neon yellow balloon first, and then I do this more distant aeration of white or pale blue or raw umber or orange to cool off the shapes. And I realized my son is a rock climber, and I realized that these are kind of boulder-like fan body form kind of objects, and so I like that they have a more maybe literal bodily or internal organ kind of quality to them, which led me to think about working collaboratively with Cameron Claiborne and Judith Brotman, where they adorned my armature bodies with embellishments, right, or with appendages, or stuck a knife in them, right? We did a little tricky maneuver, and I created a patch with lots of stuffing, so the knife didn't actually go through the internal skin of the inflatable, but it looked like it was sticking into a lumpy bit of a body. And that's just glitter and acrylic paint made into a kind of gunky scar of sorts. Anyway, I really like that these, again, it's this, other artists test me in ways. Collaborations are really awesome as artists because you get to push yourself out of your comfort zone and test and think about other ways to operate that slowly come back into your own studio practice. And I can't say how exciting that always is for me to be tested in ways that I can't imagine. And then when the recent Roe v. Wade got destroyed, I made this work where I made more nipples, I made more embellishments, I had chains, I was thinking about femme bodies in the world, but being powerfully in control, ideally, of their own future. I also think about my own 20-something offspring, female offspring, and my male offspring too, in terms of the ways that they are having to navigate a different kind of landscape. So the idea of embellishment is still something I'm thinking about. And the other thing is work on timers, right? Our work slowly spinning in space. So the slowness of a work on a little turning motor was something I was trying. The work on timers, so it would die and come to life again over time. The one on the left, I had 5 different sets of timers on so that they would deflate at different times of the day, and you could sometimes enter the gallery and certain sections were flat paintings on the floor, and then they would slowly come alive. And then the last 2 things, small scale things. So I am an artist of extremes, as you probably have figured out. So I make either miniature things where I think of the miniatures as maybe the scat or the poop of the giant prehistoric beasts that I made, that you're finding in an dig. But the one on the left is made with a 3D printer and then spray painted. The one on the right is made with plaster of Paris and then spray painted. Also, some rock climbers, I guess, subconsciously I was thinking about climbing holds, I think. I didn't realize that at the time, but works on paper. Again, somebody who can't make flat, straight things. Physically impossible for me. So when I make work on paper, I crumple it, I fold it, I spray paint it to pick up the crumples and the folds. I put tape on, and then I will come back in once I peel the tape on with some Prismacolor color pencil. But I made a ton of these during COVID because, of course, all the shows got canceled. My life went from moving around a lot to sitting at my dining room table, which I was very lucky that I was able to do that, of course. And so I was making these quarantine dream drawings, right? It's that sort of idea of crazy thoughts as you're sitting drawing. And then the digital aspect of the things that I make are also really important, and something I've been testing out more lately. So I bought myself an Oculus Quest for my 50th birthday, because why not? And so I did a show, I've done a couple of shows where I have been thinking about portals more specifically. So you move through the physical into the virtual, and then maybe back out into the physical again. So that's something I was playing. And then this, this is just a video of, it's kind of a cheat video because it's layered in Premiere, but it would be sort of what you would see inside the Oculus, if that makes sense. So I would build this atmosphere, and then people could experience it, but they could also add to it. So you see that the student there adding drawing in the Oculus. I mentioned before that I am using evil shit. So I've been trying to mend my wicked ways by making bioplastics and using, trying to reuse recycled materials from my house. Trying to crumple or soak egg cartons to make weird little things. It's very frustrating because I can only make these things at a very small scale for obvious reasons. And so now I'm trying to think of, okay, do I blend my big obnoxious things with these smaller embellishments, right? So do I continue thinking about the embellishment idea, but with these materials that aren't quite so evil, maybe? Or are a nod to a kind of futurism and an attempt to think about the environment, but also an understanding of the impossibility of that, or the imperfection of that, or what is the future?
Can you tell us, is that the wet egg carton?
Yeah, the gray. Yeah.
And what are the other things that you don't?
So the bioplastics are a mixture of, what is it, agar, water, something else in the recipe, glycerin, that's what it is, and then food coloring,
So
mica powder.
plastic?
So all the little colorful ones are the bioplastic, and they shrink. They go from sheets when I pour them out to little shrunken
Shrinky things like.
things.
Yeah.
Literally shrinky things, yes. And then I was in Scotland on residency in April and May, and I've been really thinking a lot about seaweed as both something that has a bit of cultural heritage for me, or landscape heritage for me, but also as a way to think about making bioplastics. But I gathered seaweed from Scotland. I kind of contained it in these mesh pockets. I also heated it up and made a bioplastic and then rubbed it into the surface of the object. So it was an imperfect test, but I really liked that I then got to install it out on Paris in the wind-blown, but a very sunny day. Rare. Anyway, I like that it sort of came alive in a certain way. And then if I pause, oh shit. Sorry, I'm gonna play one more thing. And then the sort of calm of the evening on the top of it plays. It was right next to a graveyard. On the Isle of Harris, the people that are in the graveyard have the best view. It's amazing. I'm telling my children they have to take my ashes and spread me on this beach. Yeah, I'm going to torture them. And And then the last couple things, sorry, I know I'm going on, but it just so you get a sense of this weird and wonderful set of curiosities that an artist gets to work through over their life, over 3 decades of making work. I have a project up right now at Millennium Park in Chicago called, it's a long title, but Nomadic Floratic Phallosian Spawn, which is another Doctor Who reference. And so I'll just play them. These are from different seasons. I made slightly, so this is another augmented reality work. So this is the summer version in Lurie Gardens, where the mother form is in the center and the offspring are circling her. And so if you're out in Millennium Park and you have your phone with you, you only really can see this, experience this through your phones.
How long will that be?
Till November of this year.
November, okay.
Yeah. So we'll go through one more, a spring cycle. It's in the winter cycle right now. We'll go through a spring cycle, a summer cycle.
So it's in Millennium Park?
Yeah. And so then you'll see the color palette changes slightly in fall. So I changed the color palette, we changed the movement of the offspring and the mother. It's a little bit more shivering. There's a great day to film this, right in the middle of a thunderstorm, so I was happy I got it. I'm still waiting for it to snow properly in Chicago so I get the winter version. So there's that, and then this is what it looks like through your phones. Can I? This is my daughter. Yeah, so just so you get a sense of the visibility of it, unless you know what you're looking for.
You use AR kit or you use AR kit?
Yeah. So this app Hoverly and this company Hoverly really helped me. Both Millennium Park hired them. And so they then built both the animation, technology. They then built the animation for me. I scanned a small expandable foam sculpture. So it started as an original. The mother figure was expandable foam painted. The offspring figures were 3D printed, sort of a newer technology, the spray painted. And so from those 3D scans, I just used Polycam. And then shared it with Hoverly, and they did the magic part. I still have to figure out how they did that. But it was with 3 other artists. Yvette Mayorga, Fahima Jeet, and Carlos Ramon are the 3 other folks in Millennium Park who have their projects in different locations. So hopefully really happy to be included. And then this is the one that's on the card here, just from Sarasota Art Museum. So I had a big installation of this, the first piece I showed you, the Cosmic Gasp Star Patrick piece, which is my favorite character from SpongeBob, hung in their atrium space in Sarasota. And then I also did this augmented reality work that's still playing. So it was relative to the piece in the gallery, and then I got another piece outside. It's the same audio on all of these. My collaborator Josh Patterson made one. Sorry, I'll just turn it down here. And then this is the tabletop version that you're seeing here. So yes, I like that. Then the physical card becomes another way that you get to take home a piece and have it in your collection or in your house, because I have a really hard time, obviously, selling my work because I make obnoxiously giant things that not many people can fit in their houses. And I am a total romantic in that sense, because I've always been really lucky that I've been able to make the things I want to make, rather than feeling like I have to make something at work that's impossibly impractical in some ways, but really allows my curiosities to lead me in weird ways. Oh, Max the cat. Okay, that is all I have, I think. Sorry, that was very long. Do you guys have any questions?
Has any of your work ever run away from home?
Yes, I hope they do. Yeah, I love it when they run away from home. And in fact, this is only my second year of being an empty nester. My kids are finally out of the house. I'm like, yes, go. So yeah, I'm very happy that they're doing their job out in the world. Yeah.
So can you scan that at the linear clock, or you have
Yeah.
to? Oh, is that the clock? Okay.
Yeah, though, both Sarasota, I have cheated a little bit with these cards because at Sarasota, they really want you to go to the museum and scan the QR code there and experience it outside of their museum. Same in Millennium Park. They want you right now until November of this year, they want you to go to Millennium Park and experience it in the park, which is it's gorgeous.
do that.
It's an amazing park to go to in every season. So they are not, I signed a contract that I can't share it, the QR code with anybody else until the end of the show.
Yeah.
But hopefully they'll let me after that.
You ever thought about, you have an Instagram page?
Yes,
You ever
yes.
thought about doing like a filter on your page?
What, to do,
You can do a camera back so that anybody on your page
can click
can
it
click it and
and see, okay, so I can do that on the actual page?
yeah.
Yeah, 'cause, Snapchat filters and TikTok filters.
Yeah, it's Spark. I think it's Spark.
Spark,
Yeah,
okay.
I'll also do it.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, that way anybody can see it.
Okay, cool. I will do that in November, once I can, I'm allowed, I will do that for sure. Yeah.
I'm fascinated by your talk. I studied 1960s inflatables against the space race. So
Yes, amazing!
references
Oh,
are
amazing.
making me so happy.
Mhm.
And one thing I noticed, a lot of those were also low pressure inflatables with the fan constantly on. But in the images, you always see the fan. And I
Mhm.
noticed that here, at least in the images, it's always hidden. And I wonder if that's conscious or if it just happens to you, because you are making them low pressure where you need the fan.
Right.
Rather than sealing them like
Yes.
balloons, and I suspect that's not only for the ease of sewing, but probably more, but they're hidden, but yeah, I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so they aren't so hidden when you're walking around them three-dimensionally. The photographs, I am obviously thinking of aestheticizing them in ways. They photograph really well. So when you see them in person, they are a lot, well, you'll see the one right there. Like you can see the fan in the back. The texture is kind of rough on the surface. They're kind of imperfect articles in some ways, but yes, I love that yeah, Archigram and goodness, I'm blanking, thank you, and Forum, and all these amazing architectural thought, ways to really explore inflatables. I just had an image pop up on my Instagram feed of the giant inflatable sphere hanging outside of the building with a plant growing inside of it. Yes. But yes, the idea that they have to be living, breathing organisms is sort of really important to me. So I didn't want to make balloons that were static. I wanted the pieces to consistently vibrate, and also to be able to misbehave, right, in some ways if I wanted them to.
Are you thinking at all about the current space race and how that might inform your future?
Very
travels?
much so, yes. I know, you have to be critical of it in some ways because we're not paying attention to this planet, but at the same time, so I'm trying to do a little bit of both. In again, very imperfect ways, because I'm trying to make these bioplastics, but it's annoying me because it's so slow and so small, and then I'm trying to I love watching the Mars rover trundling around, but I also understand that that's and I love the sort of speculative architecture that they're proposing on Mars, right? But yeah, so curious, but in human ways, if that makes sense. Yeah.
In our moment, which is so politicized,
Yes.
everything feels so urgent. How do you, like, what kind of things do you tell yourself to give yourself permission to also be playful and to just sort of pursue the things that inspire wonder? And what kind of things do you also tell your students to
Yeah.
do the same? Because there's
Oh,
a
yeah.
sense of urgency to every single move that we
Yes.
make as artists. So
Yes.
what strategies do you use?
Yeah, good question. So the piece out front, I call it expletives, and I was really liking that it's this yelling, like, it feels like your brain is exploding, right? And I had made it when Trump got in the first time around, and then I just repainted it just this past week, because I'm like, oh, you know. But this sort of sense in terms of how do I talk to my students, but I think you get to be very vocal as an artist. You get to find your own pathway, your own equation as artists in the world, but you also get to be loud and aggressive and abrasive and work against the moment, but that can often be in ways that keep you mentally healthy, right? I think for the students right now, it's so terrifying, and they're actually just closing down, and they just don't know where to start. And so that sort of sense of finding a place that you can control your own environment, you can control your own personal output, becomes a way for them to like move through the work. Not that they're not paying attention to what's happening politically, and some of them are doing it very stridently, but a lot of them are thinking more subtly, more through meditative practices, more through self-care, and that's all important. But for me, I really try and talk to them about, okay, you don't have to be literal in the way that you use your political outrage in your work. For me, I'm trying to embody it in the forms and the color palette and the things that get embedded or drawn on. But it's never, I mean, it's yelling in some ways, but it's also yelling with hopefully, a humorous, I mean, I think humor is self-care, right? Humor is
Right.
survival instinct. Humor is the only way we get through this.
Therapy in some way?
Yes, therapy, and The Onion is my favorite news source in some ways, but, so I think, yeah, to help them find strategies to navigate that, but it can be often so different for each student. Yeah, but that's a great question. But yeah, I was really, I hadn't thought about that piece in a while, and then I was like, oh God. Very good. Thank you so much for coming. You're very generous spending all this time. I'm sorry